Hello everybody, great to see you back, and I'm really delighted to be introducing Liz Williams, who's giving us our keynote today, focusing on advancing progress and how we make sure we have opportunity for people from all socioeconomic backgrounds. So as some of you will know, Liz is a long-time campaigner for the importance of everybody benefiting from digital technology, and that is so vital to this whole area, given that we know the digital divide is one of the things that holds people back. Liz is CEO of Future.Now, which is a business-to-business consortium focused on motivating both people and businesses to improve digital skills. She's also chair of the Good Things Foundation, which, as its name suggests, does good things, specifically focused on supporting digitally and socially excluded people to improve their lives through digital. And she's also a social mobility commissioner and sits on the board of the government's Digital Skills Partnership. So I'm really delighted to hand over to Liz in a minute. We will be taking questions at the end, so please keep putting questions and thoughts in the Q&A box. We will get through as many as we can before we have to lose Liz. So over to you now, Liz.
Thanks very much, Helen, and thanks for inviting me today. I'm looking forward to this next slot, which is all about, as you say, moving from hiring to progression. Today, I'm just going to give you a bit of a whistle-stop tour around the Commission and a few other bits. But Helen mentioned my background. Unsurprisingly, my role at the Commission is I lead on digital and the future of work. So that's very much where my interest lies. But in terms of today, so a little bit about the Commission, who we are, why it's important to focus on socio-economic diversity and inclusion, and why do it? What's some of the business stats around it maybe? And then, as we said, focus a little bit more about career progression, and then hopefully have a bit of a conversation, because I always find that the best bit, actually, hearing from you. So I do hope we'll get some questions at the end. Always good to start with what is social mobility, because I can remember, this probably tells you more about my family than you perhaps need to know. When I was first appointed a commissioner, somebody in my family, who shall remain nameless, wanted to know if it was to do with wheelchairs, because I used to do quite a lot on diversity and inclusion. But no, it's not. Social mobility, you guys know this, it's about the link between a person's occupation or income and the occupation or income of their parents. Very simply, it's about ensuring your background doesn't determine your future. I think about it myself slightly differently. I always talk about talent being everywhere and opportunity not necessarily being the same. And I love this picture of a snakes and ladders board, because we all have snakes and ladders in our lives, but some people's boards has a lot more ladders in it, and some people's boards has a lot more snakes in it. And actually, all of us, well, a great proportion of us actually seem to think we have more snakes, actually, because a lot of us still think we're working class, when in actual fact that might mean that we're second generation. So my parents, just to be super clear, my dad was a telephone engineer. My mum was a bookkeeper, and I never knew why she wasn't an accountant until I got a lot older, and then I realised it was because she couldn't afford to go to university. Nobody in my family's ever gone to university, including me, but my kids can't profess to be working class, because they're absolutely not, although they are both very proud of this, apprentices. So maybe we can pick that up in the discussion as well. So a little bit about the Commission. We exist to see a UK where you're born doesn't relate to where you necessarily end up your outcomes, and we're really about ensuring that everybody's got a meaningful path of opportunity, so that they have a chance of a better future. We're an independent arm's length body, 12 publicly appointed commissioners. I'm going to show you a few mugshots in a minute. And earlier this year, we moved from DFE to the Equalities Hub in Cabinet Office, and our remit is all about monitoring and advocating social mobility and providing advice to stakeholders, whether that's ministers, policymakers, think tanks, and employers. I'm going to show you the commissioners. So this is the commissioners, and actually none of us, I think, had ever held public appointment before. And on the last slide, the final bullet said we have a bias for action, and I can honestly tell you that's the case with this commission. Every single one of us, those of us that come from business, those of us that come from civil society, we are all determined. We're only here giving our time to make a difference, and it's a brilliant group to be part of. You'll see there's some very young faces there, the wonderful Saeed, Jess and Harvey, that really challenge us from a youth perspective. We've got Sammy, who's an amazing vice principal up in the north of England, who's been really very vocal over the last 18 months about the needs of young people, coming from a real point of understanding in his role at Southmore Academy. So it's been a great group of commissioners to be part of, and I'm very proud of it. Our term, this will end shortly, and we'll have some of us may stay, some of us may go, but this iteration will end later in the year. So why does social mobility matter? I think in short, from a business perspective, it's about success. Diverse teams are successful teams. Intuitively, I get that, but one of the challenges you often have with business is business only values what it can measure. So what does the data say? And there's a few stats and facts I'll share with you in a minute, but there's a whole piece about business operations, there's a piece about well-being and how people feel about working in your organization. There's that whole thing about future-proofing your organization, making sure you've got diversity of thinking and skills and a different pipeline. And then there's also that thing about how you relate into your customers and how people feel about you as an organization, whether you reflect them. So few stats. Smart business, it says at the top of this slide, but 43% of businesses with a more diverse workforce have higher profits. On average, people from lower socio-economic backgrounds outperform their more advantaged peers. If you've got an inclusive team, it tends to make better business decisions. The stat there says 87% of the time, and they do it quicker, 60% better results. And I love the final one here, being a massive advocate for apprentices. People who start their careers via apprenticeships are likely to stay longer. And that gives you that whole piece about removing recruitment costs and just getting very loyal employees, which you'll know is a very valuable thing for business. But today we're talking about progression. And what is a meritocracy? A place where everyone who's got skill, who's got imagination, can aspire to reach that really high level, that they can progress through their career, that's performance led, that they get there because it's a true reflection of their skills and their potential, as opposed to perhaps people just throwing ladders down and pulling them up regardless of their aptitude. And of course, we all know that happens in all organizations and in every sector, doesn't it? Of course it does. I'm not so sure, actually. So I've got a few stats and facts, around the evidence. There's been a lot of research in the last year in this area, particularly focused on progression. So progression is very simply, we might have organizations that are able to recruit inclusively, perhaps biased towards social mobility, bringing people into their organization from very diverse backgrounds. But once people are in, do they get on? Do they get up? Do they stay? That's what progression is all about. And I think it's really important before we start to go through some of the different sectors and what the data is telling us, to just take a moment and say, it would be really easy to look at the sectors I'm going to talk about and point a finger at them. But I absolutely tell you, you must not do that. These organizations and the sectors that are on these slides are the ones that have opened themselves up to analysis and scrutiny. That is really not an easy decision for any organization or sector to make. Actually, going ahead of the crowd is often the hardest thing. This is true leadership. Actually knowing where your problems are and how you can start to address them is a really important part of it. But a big spoiler alert before I kind of go into the details. There are progression gaps for those that come from lower socioeconomic backgrounds in all of the industries that I'm going to talk about now. And I would imagine that's actually probably true for every industry. So let's just look at a few of them. Let's start with law. So people from lower socioeconomic backgrounds take a year and a half, 18 months longer to reach partner on average than colleagues from higher socio groups. That's recent data, September 2020, done by the Bridge Group. So that's law. Financial services, 25% longer to progress through the grades. None of that can be explained by performance. There's no statistical evidence to link performance with socioeconomic background. But the good news is that stat, the piece of work that underpinned it, has led to the creation of a task force to boost socioeconomic diversity at senior levels in the financial and professional services sector. That work's been spearheaded by Treasury and Bays, and it's being run by the City of London. And I'm really proud that I've been asked to be part of that. And I'm sitting on the measurement working group. And I have to say, it's a hard job we've got ahead of us, but it's a really ambitious task force with a really ambitious goal, and never been more important. So if you want to find more about that, I put the website on there. It's www.cityoflondon.gov.uk. Who gets ahead? Really important piece of work there that will be running over the next 18 months. Let's move to another sector, real estate. People from lower socioeconomic backgrounds, make up 27% less of the employees than in other sectors when it comes to these kind of industries. And over half of the people that are in senior positions come from higher socio groups. Again, that's coming from the Bridge Group, and it's reasonably recent data back in 2020. Creative industries, incredibly interesting area. You're twice as likely to land a job here if you're privileged. And if you're privileged, you're much more likely to have greater autonomy, have supervisory responsibility, and to progress to become a manager, to become a leader. The civil service. Now, this report is one that's really caught quite a few headlines recently, and I know you've got Bernadette coming later, so I'm going to talk a little bit more about it, but not too much, because I know you'll want to talk to her about it. But people from lower socioeconomic backgrounds don't go on to progress in the same way in the civil service as those from more advantaged backgrounds. And we've just done in the commission a big piece of work led by my fellow commissioner, Sam Friedman. It's called Navigating the Labyrinth, and it really looks at this whole area. The civil service has made really significant strides in terms of improving the socioeconomic background of their recruits, how they bring people in. And this was a real leading piece of work to look at. So what happens once people are with us, and what does it look like? And I'll come back to that report in a second, as there's lessons for everybody in there, for all employers, all sectors. Just a few more stats that perhaps might explain why this matters, a bit more of the reality. If you're from a poor background, over half of people from those backgrounds receive no training after leaving school. So it's really hard to reach your potential if you've got nothing coming in, nothing stimulating you, nothing giving you that drive going onward. And even if you break through, for example, in a professional role, you earn 17% less on average than more privileged colleagues. Now that stat really fascinates me, and there's some stuff within the civil service report that could give you some clues on that. But so much of it is about how you know what to navigate, what to ask for, how you manage certain situations. So let's talk a little bit more about the civil service report. So this, as I say, was a report that we did from the Commission, looking at socio-economic background and career progression within the civil service. It was very much an independent audit of what's happening within the civil service, and it's the first ever investigation of how socio-economic background shapes career progression there. And, it was analysis of their people survey, which went to over 300,000 people, plus 104 in-depth interviews carried out with middle management plus people within the civil service to get their views and perspectives on it. And it worked across 4 departments: Treasury, Department for Transport, Revenue and Customs, and Cabinet Office. And Bernadette, who champions this area, will, as I say, be speaking later. So I'm only going to give you a little bit of a teaser into some of the areas that we looked at. In short, people get in, but they struggle to get on. Significantly more staff from higher socioeconomic backgrounds and other industries in the UK workforce. 54% from advantaged professional managerial backgrounds compared to 37% in the wider workforce. And the higher you go, the less socioeconomically diverse the workforce becomes. Only 18% of the most senior civil servants come from working class backgrounds. And that's not unique to them, not by a long shot. So we've got this beautiful infographic that we use to kind of really bring this report to life. And yeah, I think it's a great title for it, Navigating the Labyrinth, because that's really what it showed. It showed that there were a variety of different barriers and challenges that came through. And maybe I'll just share a little bit about some of these. We've got some of the headings there, the 7 that kind of are within that labyrinth within the civil service. So starting off, I'll just talk a little bit about, say, accelerator roles. There are certain jobs in the civil service that if you manage to get them, they are prize ones that can facilitate your fast track progression. You know, for example, if you get to work in a minister's private office, or you get to go in one of the really sexy senior central departments, those places are where you can really start to move. But you need to know. If no one's told you that actually working in a ministerial private office is the way to actually advance yourself, you're not going to be seeking that. It's like an unknown queue. There's this thing about exploiting ambiguity in the system. That's all about knowing when certain situations, there's maybe certain things you can do in those situations to your advantage. So, for example, when you're talking to a hiring manager, how you present yourself, how you talk about what your ambition levels are, how you kind of manipulate that situation. Manipulate sounds like a terrible word to use in this context, but actually it's that thing about just knowing what you should be saying at a certain point to signal certain things. And those from higher socio-economic groups tend to know how to navigate that ambiguity, those grey areas, to be able to put themselves into a slightly better place. The Whitehall effect, like many companies, more top grade posts in the civil service are in London. Proximity to Whitehall is critical for increasing visibility. So that, is a really interesting one. I found this one about dominant behaviour codes so interesting, and it spoke to me personally, because there was, what they found was that within the civil service there was ways of speaking, and some of your kind of maybe your political or your interests, what you're oriented towards, are much more likely, if you're displaying those, you're much more likely to be seen as a person that really fits in. And sometimes if you come from a working class background, or you've got a South London twang like I have, actually these things are really hard to kind of know what you should be doing and what you should be saying, and you just feel like the outsider. You just need to make sure that people are, you're aware of that. Somebody was telling me a great story the other day, somebody that worked in the civil service, and they were saying they went to a meeting, and it was in Whitehall, and at the beginning of the meeting, they were just chatting on the margins, and somebody said, "Oh, what college did you go to?" And they very smugly said, "I didn't go to college, I went to university." And of course, they didn't know that college in university meant something quite different, and they've only learned that over time. In fact, I didn't know it either, because I didn't go to university. So that whole area. So there's a whole fascinating, I would really encourage you to read this quite weighty report. Actually, it's brilliant. It's a really good, insightful, slightly teeth-grating read at time. But as I say, the civil service should be absolutely applauded for really doing this, because this is groundbreaking work, and we can't move forward without knowing these things. We didn't only do a report on what we saw, we also came up with and produced for the civil service a suggested action plan with recommendations of how they might respond to some of the issues. And again, that's something that I would say, it's not only relevant to the civil service. A lot of what's in here is so relevant to other organisations. For example, we talk about workforce-wide reporting on socio-economic backgrounds. We know that business is driven by data. So if you don't even know what your socio-economic situation is, then how do you move forward? The success of any strategy is undoubtedly underpinned by the quality of data. And that whole thing, for example, of the London example is, it's a really good one to keep thinking about. So a little bit about more from us at the Commission. So we're not just here going, oh, and by the way, you should do this, and you should do that, and you should do the other, without saying it. And how? And how do you do it? Where's the best insights? Where can I get practical help as a business? And I'd really encourage you to go to this website, socialmobilityworks.org. There you'll find our toolkit that's filled with practical help around outreach, hiring, progression. It covers all of the areas that you need to think about from a social mobility perspective. It's also got lots of stories of organisations really being open about what they've done, what's worked, what hasn't worked, and there's also a directory in there so people can connect and talk to others. We run lots of masterclasses. They're delivered by role model organisations ourselves, and then our Instagram is filled with real people and their stories. There's so much that can be much more inspiring if you can actually see real people and what they've been up to and how it feels for them. So a few things I just wanted to leave you to think about. Data, I mentioned it. If you haven't got data, it makes it really hard. So as I say, the toolkit can really help you understand how you might measure the socio-economic background of your existing workforce and applicants, and how you can benchmark your progress. Outreach, move beyond those same old places that you go to when it's coming to recruitment. Think about FE colleges or schools in social mobility cold spots, and please, when it comes to work experience, advertise it, make it open to people. Don't make it something that, you know, you have to be in the company or be the CEO's nephew to get that work experience opportunity. We've all seen that. Hiring, you know, remove the obstacles. If you use different language can lead to different outputs when it comes to job adverts. So really focus on potential and query whether you actually need to say X and Y qualification is required. I mean, I still see so many jobs that I couldn't apply for because I haven't got a university degree. I'm in my 50s, seriously. Judge me by what I've done, not by what I might have done 20 or 30 years ago. Leadership and advocacy, diversity inclusion undoubtedly starts at the top. So you really need buy-in from senior leaders. So find those advocates, find those role models, find the allies that are out there that are willing to really stand up and understand this story and why it matters to their business, because it does. Culture, two-way dialogue. Actually, one of the things that the civil service report showed, that, you know, when people had an opportunity to talk about it, they gave you rich insights. And, you know, nobody wants stuff done to them. There is so much content and expertise within your own organization to help you. And then finally, progression. Please ensure those pipelines are open so the talent you've got in your midst rises up your ranks, you know, whether that be about training. So much training actually only goes to people that are senior rather than actually all the way through the organization. Think about things like class pay gap and ensure that your promotion practices are fair and inclusive, and that if you're bringing people in, see how long they stay, because actually that whole thing about how you're measuring that, because that's really expensive if you bring people in and your culture in your organization is such that progression is impossible, so you just lose them. So that was a kind of negative thing, but I want you to remember there is loads of help out there to help you. At the Commission, we've got lots, but also Dods and others, you know, lots of content out there. A few places that I'd really encourage you to go if you want to find out more. So you can find us on Twitter and on Instagram. I can't tell you how much fun we had convincing the government that we should be on Insta, but we've done it. We're also on LinkedIn. And as I say, that socialmobilityworks.org website is just jam-packed full of really helpful stuff. And of course, anything else, just email the team at contact@socialmobilitycommission.gov.uk. So that's it. Have we got some questions, Helen?
Fantastic, thank you, Liz. Yes, so we've got, I think if we can stop sharing the slides, brilliant, well, thank you. So we've got, first of all, actually just one thing, which is, I think, clarification. So I think early on in your presentation, you talked about the people you brought in from these more diverse routes outperforming those through more traditional routes. Could you say what you mean by outperform in this context?
As in they stay longer and they do better. So, I mean, I can, if it would be helpful, I can get the data source for that and maybe send it with the team so you can see where that comes from, because it's always helpful to know the kind of the data source, I think, on those things. But yeah, happy to do that.
Fantastic. And another question is on data. It's been a bit of a theme about intersectionality. So is there any intersectional data that you've found that people might be able to draw on?
Yeah, there is. I mean, I think it's so interesting. If you come from business, I mean, I've had a 30-year corporate career, and so many of the other commissioners have. You turn around and you go, there's so many things we can focus on. Are we worried about gender? Are we worried about social mobility? Are we worried about, are we worried about ethnicity? What are all the things? But there is evidence that shows that actually, if you look at social mobility, a lot of those other factors come through. So certainly I'd have a look on the website of Social Mobility Works. And if there's something in particular people are looking to be pointed towards, drop us an email and we'll help kind of navigate through and make sure that we're directing you to the right places. But in short, the answer is there is data there.
Fantastic, thank you. And I was wondering if you could say a bit more about promotion practices, because it's something we haven't talked about much today, but is obviously crucial in when we're thinking about the progression bit of this. And have you got any kind of examples of the kinds of practices that tend to be exclude people, and the things that you would encourage employers to shift to so they can open up progression and have fair progression practices, promotion practices?
I mean, it might be a good one actually when you get to talk to Bernadette about some of the things that we're seeing in the civil service, because it's that thing about, you know, are people encouraged to go to the job? Are they getting a nudge from their manager to suggest they're applying, or are you expecting them to just find out about it through getting, you know, through seeing an advert? Sometimes people require nudges and encouragement to be able to see themselves in that light. So I think the more that you, I mean, it's a really difficult one, isn't it? Because is nudging negative or is nudging positively? You know, is that thing about being actually sure that everybody's having the same kind of opportunities, and you've not got things within your practices that mean only certain people get to see those roles or see themselves in as being a potential candidate, or conversely are put off for applying because they perhaps don't see themselves as conforming to the norm for that role. So I think it's that kind of thing that's really important there.
I mean, it's interesting you were talking about there about the role of managers, and I was thinking about that in relation to the culture bit as well. And one thing that I may be wrong, but it sounds to me like quite a big part of this is about training your managers so that they have got their heads in this, so that they are proactively thinking about how do we create mobility, who might I be overlooking? Is that right, that that's something people should be thinking about?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, if I think of my own career, I mean, I remember somebody talking to me about self-limiting behavior, and I'd never ever heard of it as a term. I had to go and, you know, look it up. And I can remember there's like one manager in my career who turned around and said, I could see you being a director within X period. And I had to go and almost lay down because it was not where I saw myself. And I think that thing about managers being able to see something in you that you can't see yourself, and being able to encourage and cajole to people to think broader, because I think the more, you know, that you can show people that you have belief in them, the more they will have belief in themselves. And I think that's certainly true for people from lower socio-economic groups, that you almost, you know, may not always see yourself in that space. And if someone can give you, going back to that nudge work, if someone can give you that kind of inspiration and aspiration, that can really help. And I think managers have a really important role to play there. They can also, by the way, conversely, destroy people's kind of views of themselves. It's so important that managers are, you know, are able to encourage and support people through and enable them to really see the potential that they have in themselves.
Yeah, and I guess that's also where the data comes in that if you're leading an organisation and you want to know whether the cumulative effect of what your managers are doing is to make progress or to detract from it, the only way you can do that is by seeing the data of who is staying and who is progressing.
Yeah, I think that's accurate. But I think also, I mean, I suppose it's also a reflection maybe on general management capability. It may not be just related to progression, you know, or socio-mobility. Actually, if you through your attitude survey, you are measuring how people feel about the support they're getting from managers, then, you know, you can get some really insightful view about your organization culture.
Yes, absolutely.
Great managers make great teams, as we all know, and bad managers make terrible teams.
Yes, and it's a perennial UK problem, isn't it? Our kind of the level of management that we have sometimes.
I think actually that's spot on, Helen. I think we don't value enough people management as a specialism in its own right. It's often viewed as a bolt on, and yet I can think, you know, when you see a really good people manager and what they can do for human capital, it's stunning, absolutely stunning.
Yeah, which I guess also comes back to promotion to some extent. Are people being promoted because they are going to be good managers, or because they're good at a technical job and they may or may not have any interest or aptitude for the management bit that comes as you go upwards?
Yeah, and do you know that's such a fascinating thing, isn't it? It's like, are you a specialist at something, and suddenly you find you get this extra bit bolted on that isn't your skill set, you know, and that can you know, is it right that you automatically, you know, can you not just be a subject matter expert at a very senior level and other people be expert at building teams and coalescing teams? That, yeah, fascinating.
Yes, it's a classic thing with teaching, isn't it? The best teachers end up getting promoted and then they don't have any time to teach, which was the thing they loved.
Yeah, or they end up being head teachers, as you say, don't have time to teach, but also they're suddenly responsible for a whole load of other stuff that they, you know, they are not necessarily well equipped. I'm sure they shape themselves into brilliant shape to be able to do it, but nonetheless, a great teacher should never be underestimated, the value of them.
Yes, absolutely. Now we are out of time, and actually that feels like a rather good point to leave the conversation on, about the value of, it's kind of mentors, isn't it, of different kinds, whether that's your teacher, your line manager, the people who see something in you and help you see a path, can make all the difference to this.
Absolutely.
Cool. Well, thank you so much, Liz. It's been brilliant to have you with us, and thank you to all of you for your questions.